Okay, so welcome to part 4. I'm Mike Mena once again. This is going over the chapter called Objective, and this is in part 4 called The Deployment of Sexuality. So it's called Objective. So what is Foucault's objective in this chapter? So he wants to provide an analytics of power. So not necessarily define what power is, just so that we become stuck in describing what power is over and over again in this new way. He wants to do something different. So there's a particularly famous quote in this chapter that is cited pretty often, and actually he says it in other places in interviews and stuff like that. So we're going to go automatically to page 88, and this is from 88 to 89. It goes over the top. It's right here at the bottom. So just very simple, really short quote. In political thought and analysis, we still have not cut off the head of the king. So what does that mean? He says something similar on page 91. And this is the very last sentence, last sentence right here. We must at the same time conceive of sex without law and power without the king. So what does that mean, to cut the head off the king in our theory of power? So Foucault believes that we've been stuck in this top-down perception of power, that we always think of power as coming from above and being enforced in a downward direction, as if the way people get in line and stay in line is primarily because there is a figure at the top that dictates what they do. So this could be, a government, the boss of a corporation, etc. Another contemporary example is this supposed war on terror. Who does the U.S. go after? It goes after the heads of these alleged terrorist organizations, as if they will somehow incapacitate the entire infrastructure of these organizations that have been building for decades, as if that will somehow undo America's imperial conquests in these regions, as if we ourselves as America are not directly implicated in the infrastructure itself of these organizations. But we're still thinking that if we attack the head of supposed terrorist organizations, that will somehow end the movement. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the way power works. So Foucault wants an analytic of power that no longer takes laws and codes as the starting point. And this is a really radical idea, and it's so convincing and it's so useful. There been so much knowledge production on behalf of just this idea. So he names the kind of power that we're talking about, this top-down, he names this negative power. And remember, this is the power that says no, that works through deduction and through limitations, through censorship. He calls this negative power juridico-discursive. And we need to remember this key word because it comes up a lot throughout Foucault's work. So think about the word juridical, and what does that sound like? It might sound like juries, judges, judicial. All these words point to laws and institutions. So that's juridical. Now the next word, discursive, this is just another way of saying discourse put into practice. So think about this as discourses related to laws or judicial systems or judicial discourses, juridico-discursive. Now, we have tons of theories centered around monarchies, which are totally centralized forms of power. Now, over time, monarchies have served as this kind of ideal type of power, and we've convinced ourselves in various discourses that use monarchies as the central metaphor for power, that indeed power works primarily in this way, from the top down, from official avenues of law and punishment. This is too simple, according to Foucault. It misses the way power operates and ignores all the micro or capillary relationships and instruments of power. The stuff that really keeps the masses in line, what individuals begin internalizing. This is all missed by this model that takes power as purely centralized. But, instead we keep conceptualizing power in this binary form of oppressor and the oppressed. On page 85, he gives us a pretty good idea of how this monarchy metaphor has been extended into almost every kind of relationship of power. So on 85, it's right here in the middle. It says, to the formal homogeneity of power in these various instances corresponds the general form of submission in the one who is constrained by it, whether the individual in question is the subject opposite the monarch, the citizen opposite the state, the child opposite the parents, or the disciple opposite the master. A legislative power on one side and an obedient subject on the other. So, up until this point, when Foucault was writing, he believed that theories of power were all feeding into this juridico-discursive model. And on page 88, he says, the representation of power has remained under the spell of monarchy. Now, this is problematic because the monarch mainly uses force and violence to control populations through torture and through death. And the monarch had the right to put people to death, a divine right, the right to death, which is, I believe, the title of the last chapter of this book, which is probably the most famous and one of the most exciting chapters in this entire book. But this right to death, however, might become unreliable in countries with, let's say, free media or something. So on 89, we got another pretty good quote. This is covering the way we've looked at power primarily as negative power. So 89, it says, a power that was centered primarily around deduction and death. It is utterly incongruous with the new methods of power whose operation is not ensured by right, but by technique, not by law, but by normalization. not by punishment, but by control. Methods that are employed on all levels and in forms that go beyond the state and its apparatus. Yeah, that's a good quote. So, power is, or perhaps always was, infinitely more complex than this top-down, juridico-discursive form of analysis or theory. So our theory then needs to become more complex to be able to analyze what's going on today. Okay, well, I thought I'd be able to get the whole part of the book in one video, as I've been doing up until now, but it seems that this end of the book is really picking up a lot of momentum, and there's a lot of stuff to cover in here. So I might have to go chapter by chapter. That's what the title of the video says anyways. So I might actually have to go chapter by chapter. Okay, so once again, I'm Mike Manna. I'll see you guys next time.